So now we're recording. I'm sorry to those who join us now. We are already in the middle of a discussion. I didn't remember to record before, but I was saying that we discussed the process of women's inclusion in the conservative movement that over several decades resulted in what today is probably total equality between men and women in their roles and everything in the community. Maybe with some people with a grudge and not too happy about it, but as communities, it is accepted. And I was discussing what's happening in the last decade or two or three in the Orthodox rabbinic world and the communities, that some of us are moving in similar directions in the sense of women Torah learning, women teaching, being ordained, being rabbinic leaders, halachic leaders, teaching Torah, being community leaders, whether alone, that's very rare. A woman alone leading a shul, a community, is very rare. There are a few individuals, but not many. Being participant in as a community leader, there's more of that. Not tens, not hundreds, not tens, but probably maybe tens if we count Israel and the U.S. Maybe we've reached a few tens of women in different kinds of roles and forms of doing it, being participant in community leadership. We're certainly way beyond that in women teaching and answering halachic questions and things like that. Some participation in shul, looking for ways to participate in shul. And here is something that is differentiating between the conservative movement and the Orthodox, and that is in what freedom we take for ourselves to change decisions. Meaning, if you check what we've done in Kinol David, Etzem, what we've done over the years is to change the decisions of norms in the shul without changing any halachic decision. Women with Sefer Torah is a non-issue in halacha.
There's no isur.
There's no I don't have to make a new psak to allow this. I just have to say, well, it's permissible. So if it's permissible, we can do it. We have a mechitza. It's within halachic regulations or demands. Some people will not like it. Some people will. Some people say it's too high, too low, or there are more strict opinions. But there are clearly opinions that accept it. Women speaking in front of the community, again, is not a halachic chidush. It's, do you want to do it or not? Do you think it's a good idea or not a good idea? It's not a halachic decision. Women saying Kaddish has been a discussion for 200, 300 years with different opinions. We've broadened the opening. We've broadened the how permissible it is and how accepted and how common it is. But we've taken something that was permissible and broadened it. Learning Torah, giving piskei halacha, teaching Torah was always existing, but very, very minimal, very narrow. And we've broadened it. We have not done something that is really halachically different than in the past. And waiting for us down the road, or some people would say down the slippery slope, I would say waiting for us down the road, there are going to be questions. Do we make different kind of halachic decisions? If we talk about aliyot la Torah, there are halachic sources. The Gemara in Masechet Megillah is explicit that women did have aliyot la Torah. There are different rare opinions in the history of halacha in the Middle Ages, where there were some rabbis when under these conditions, under those conditions, did allow it. So there is a basis for it. There is, what's the word? There are precedents. Takdimim in Hebrew. There are precedents. So there is a beginning of an ongoing discussion. It's not a broad discussion. It's not very, very active, the discussion. I have to say it's happening. It's happening in some shuls with a mechitza, where the women do that, but don't lead the tefillah because there's a halachic basis for having aliyot and not a halachic basis for women leading the tefillah and so on. And I can't say when and where some things might happen or might not happen, but I'm saying I think we can identify with some things that are happening about women's equality in the world at large and within religious communities as well. And at the same time, we differ from the conservative movement in the sense of saying this is not up to us. And I think that's a very major difference between conservative and Orthodox. I think the conservative rabbis, as a criteria for making halachic decisions, consider themselves having the authority to make changes, to change things that were decided by halacha deciders in previous generations. Within the Orthodox world, this is considered something that we don't have the authority to do. They had greater authority, whether they were greater Talmidei Chachamim or they were accepted by Am Yisrael at a certain point in time, and we do not necessarily have the permission, so to speak, the authority to change those decisions. So we restrict ourselves in a place where they didn't, and that restricts our ability to make some decisions. Is this forever, or can this evolve at a certain point in time? I can't be 100% sure in either direction, and it's a good question, and I'm very curious to know what is going to happen in my lifetime, and also what we call in Hebrew achrei 120, more than 59 years from now. But I don't know for sure. So it's you might say, well, someone might say the conservative movement is better because it's moving farther ahead. You might say it's going too far, too fast. Might make both of those claims. You might say too far. And you might say it might not necessarily be too far, but it's too fast. It's a relative thing, too fast. But I would agree we have to keep some kind of wise process. But at the same time, we have to be. I'm willing to say openly that we should be in a certain process, because if we're not addressing the issues, then we're ignoring the issues, then we're ignoring the people, we're ignoring the women, we're ignoring where society is at, and we're going to lose people either to non-Orthodoxy or to no religion at all. So it's better to engage the process and try and be participant, guiding it, as I said in the Tzal gathering, rather than try to push it back or even try to ignore it. It's just going to go wild. If we ignore it, it's going to go wild without us. So it's better that we try to help direct it and give it a certain pace, which will be healthier and better in the long run. Michael, bevakasha.
So it strikes me that in an ideal world, the reform movement, the conservative movement could almost be considered a gateway drug. You're trying to get people, a gateway drug. You're trying to get people to try Judaism.
Make sure he knows what a gateway
and
is.
that
I don't.
Yeah. So the gateway drug means people think of marijuana as something that will eventually lead to shooting heroin into your veins. It's a way into that culture. We want people to become more active in Judaism. And for some people that have no connection, they weren't raised that way, perhaps the easier approach of reform and conservative Judaism can be effective in getting them in the door. I have real reservations about whether that will actually lead to people that are more committed Jewishly, because they seem to be really working towards dilution of Jewish knowledge and Jewish practice, at least in America, in the institutions I'm familiar with. And we lived through that whole process that you described, going back to the 80s, of going to a shul. There was no Orthodox shul in Fort Worth at that time. There was a traditional shul where all the performative roles were men. They did not have a mechitza, but everything else was basically according to the way we would do it at your shul. And when the people that ran the shul decided they needed more participation, and the way to do that would be to bring in the women, and they joined an organization called United Synagogue, which was kind of the umbrella organization for the conservative movement. And along with that came much more liberalization of policies. And one of the things that struck me is that when the women that wanted to participate really took hold of it, it was always dressing the part and performative interest. They wanted to lead. They wanted to lead davening, lead Torah reading, et cetera, was there really interest in learning more halacha and incorporating that? Not that I could see. Edda may be able to speak more to that. But the downside to me was that a lot of men that were involved said, I don't have to do that anymore. The women can do it. And you saw a big switch in who was leading, who was in charge,
Who's showing up.
who was showing up. So I think it's a two-edged sword, certainly in the States. One of the issues that you don't have necessarily in Israel is the language barrier. Everybody obviously has Hebrew. That's not true in the States. So it takes effort to learn those roles, much more effort. Anna, you want to say something?
Well, I was talking about, you were saying about going with the times and everything. Right now, like within the last couple of months and everything, in the Jewish newspaper here, there is a person that I'm not sure how they converted, either reform or conservative, but I'm not sure it's conservative even. But this person was admitted to JTS, which is conservative, and they are a they and them. They are not a man, they are not a woman, they are a they and them. And also, I'm not sure how they converted, and they were allowed in to become a rabbinical student. So I think that sometimes you go a little too far trying to fit in.
So these are good questions. First of all, what you're describing in Fort Worth specifically is something that it's interesting to understand that is one of the possible processes that could happen. I would say a few things. First of all, it's a relevant consideration, a relevant point to take into consideration. It shouldn't just be making things easier for everyone, because that's not going to lead us to growth. That's going to lead us to watering things down. On the other hand, there are places where it's necessary to allow people, as we've discussed in the past, to allow people to have some Jewish identity, even if I don't think it's very deep or committed, better than pushing people away and having nothing at all. It's something to consider, as you said, a two-edged sword, and it can backfire in either direction. It's very hard to decide. You can also have a community that gives a message, which is why, for instance, in Kino David, when I came up with the idea some maybe 10 years ago, we didn't do this in the beginning, but to have a halacha taught every Shabbat, one of the reasons that I did it, that I initiated it, was to say we're very open-minded, we're very accepting, but we are a community that believes in keeping halacha. If you don't personally, you are 100% accepted. We embrace you. Please come and be participant. And you can be participant like anyone else. But we are giving the message that the Torah that we believe in is committed to halacha. So we want to kind of balance and give both sides. We will try to hold up and put up on a pedestal, if I'm using the right word, people who achieve, Torah, halachic achievements, whether they get smicha or they finish a masechet, or they're leading some kind of learning and things like that. We try to encourage that. Of course, if a person is doing chesed and joining the army and other things, we want to point out these people as well. But certainly we want to encourage taking Torah more seriously and halacha more seriously and so on. But at the same time, we do have to be aware of the fact that there are other people around. At one point in Kino David, we had someone who was, we've had this more than once, not one person. We have highs and lows. If I try to describe Kino David to people, I sometimes tell them we can have on the peak parts of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we can be in a hall with 600 chairs and it's not enough. And when we need a minyan for Mincha and Shabbat, we might have difficulty getting a minyan or creating a daily minyan of Kino David. And that's saying something about who we are, because we are very broad and accepting, and not everyone is committed, as in some other Orthodox shuls. But on the other hand, we do attract many people to certain occasions. And then someone was complaining about it, that, we're taking into consideration the less committed people rather than the more committed people. Food for thought for me. But at the same time, I reacted and I said, on the one hand, I would love to see people, because they come into Kino David, I would love to see them growing in their Jewish commitment, in their Jewish activity, and how much Jewish identity is an important part of their lives, how many mitzvot they are actively performing and involved in and care about, and so on. On the other hand, if we retain a Jewish connection for some people, if that's all it is, if we don't get them to grow, but we get them to retain a connection that they've had in the past, and other more square, strict, not diverse Orthodox communities don't speak to them, because of which they will not be part of any community or not part of an Orthodox community. And they will be part of Kinol David, and their children will not grow up as halachically committed people, but the rabbi that they know will be Orthodox, and the shul and the community will be part of their lives, and they won't drift away. That's also worth all our efforts. So all these are considerations. Another consideration is the broader community. And this is a point where I think, once again, I will point out a difference between Orthodox and conservative, and also relating to what you were saying. Because according to what I find here in this document, and I'm basing all this whole discussion on it, is that part of what guides conservative rabbis in making halachic decisions is the community. Meaning, if the community comes and says, we want mixed seating, that becomes a consideration to accept it. What's the logic behind this? The logic is, we want people to be in shul. We want them to continue coming. We don't want them to leave. We want we want the Jewish community. And if this is what the community wants, then that's how we're going to continue to have a Jewish community. You come to an Orthodox rabbi with a request. The first question he will ask himself or herself today is this halachically acceptable? It might be different from the norm, but first of all, let's ask if it's halachically acceptable. I don't appreciate when Orthodox rabbis are asked, for instance, are women allowed to dance with the Sefer Torah and Simchat Torah? And they say, no, asur. I don't appreciate that. It's not the truth. The truth is that the Gemara, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch say it's permissible. If they say it's permissible, but it's not a good idea, or it's permissible, it's not accepted, it's not the minhag, I don't think it's a good idea, I encourage you not to do it. Those are different kinds of answers, but they're truthful. They're not lying. They're speaking the truth. So an Orthodox rabbi asks himself, first of all, is it halachically permissible or not? Then, if it's permissible, is it a good idea or not? If it's not halachically permissible, do all of the halachic opinions think this is acceptable, or are there this is not acceptable? Is there a minority view that says that it is acceptable? Are the circumstances such that we should? But he thinks about it within halachic frameworks. One of the rabbis in Ra'anan, we don't clash personally because we don't engage in clashing with one another. Neither of us. We're very different. It's hard, to the level where it's not comfortable for us to discuss things with one another, because it will become a clash. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in a discussion. I have no problem, no difficulty discussing with someone whose opinion is very different than mine, but if it becomes a clash, it's not worth it. But he just put out a video on the question of having musical Hallel. What we do every Chol HaMoed and Yom HaAtzmaut, we're having one next week, Yom HaAtzmaut. And we're not the only ones. Many shuls that are more non-capital C conservative than us are having halachic, musical davenings and things like that. And he did not say it's forbidden. He did not say that. He showed reasons why there are those who say it's forbidden. Made very good points, but he said clearly there are opinions who accept it. He didn't say if you do it, it's against halakha, or I'm gonna excommunicate you or anything like that. He presented it very honestly. his opinion, and he spoke against it because of things similar to what you were saying before. That it's not coming from a place of people who studied it in depth and are willing to work hard at their Judaism, and then this comes as a result of that. It comes more as something which is fun for people. It uplifts them spiritually, but it's very easy. It's not encouraging people to make a spiritual effort on their Judaism. I listened to the full, more or less 40 minutes of that video, and I appreciated that he was honest about it, and I disagreed with the bottom line. And one of the reasons why I disagreed with the bottom line is that if everyone in Am Yisrael was working on their Judaism so seriously, or if he has methods to get to reach people, all different kinds of Jews all over the country, and get them to work seriously on their Judaism and so on, and do that instead of having a musical Hallel, even then I wouldn't agree with him because I like the musical Hallel. But I would understand that he's doing something constructive. But I don't think he's being constructive. I think he's speaking about a theory, or maybe his community is like that. He certainly has an easier time than I do making a minyan for Mincha and Shabbat, or a daily minyan. They probably have a few minyanim every day. It's a group that's more committed and caring and pushing themselves halachically within Judaism. But that's his community. If I look at the broader community, he is not attracting other people who are less connected and committed. So I don't agree with the bottom line of what he's saying. So I'm saying it's a very complex, broad picture. There are a lot of considerations to be taken into account. And yes, I agree that sometimes making it too easy or accepting that people are crossing red lines, but I want them to be there, or it's making X participant, it's enabling A to be participant, but pushing B out is a consideration that we need to consider. But at the same time, I think there's another, like you said, it's a two-edged sword, and I also think we need to be thinking seriously about the other side. And at the end of the day, I can't commit that my decision, our decision, any decision it's not a mathematical equation. Excuse me, Eliezer. It's not a mathematical equation with one right answer, and it could be different in different places, different times as well. Eliezer.
Thanks. First of all, I'd like to say that where is the divide in Canada where you go down three different ways? There's a glacial divide, I think. I'm not sure.
Oh, the congregations.
That's right. It's not necessarily two slippery slopes. There can be a third slippery slope, which I think exists.
What is it?
I think it's that.
Let me define the first two. Okay, and then you add a third.
Yeah, I think
The first two slippery slopes are, one is you become lenient on all kinds of halachot, or you make changes. You make one change, people are not, that's not sufficient for them. They want another change and another change. You're going to go to too many changes too fast. We're going to lose our backbone of Jewish identity. That's one slippery slope. The other slippery slope is you move too far away from halakha and the community and what's accepted in the world around us. Move too far away from one another. You're not going to pull people more to Judaism. You're going to lose people more to the general society, which is a consideration, another side of the slippery slope to be taken into consideration. Eliezer is adding a third slippery slope.
It's that unthinkingly pretending that you're following the halakha. And in other words, just making gut decisions. You sort of hinted at this in your discussion, making gut decisions without thinking things through. And I see this quite a bit in Israel. And I don't
in Israel.
Yeah, and I don't believe, I also don't believe that Orthodoxy as a formalism necessarily follows the halakha. They're also reform in a certain sense. And I can give you several instances. Corona, when there were communities that refused to obey the isolation laws in Corona, although it's obvious that it would save lives. Another one is the draft issue, which I think the overwhelming halakha says that in a war of a required war that you must fight. But the communities that these people serve don't like that. And so they go against what I think might be the halakha. Another thing was, I was thinking about, I forgot.
Let's go for the general idea
Oh,
rather
okay.
than the
But the
details.
general idea, and so you could say that, I mean, I know some people who are close to this Vad halakha. I don't think they serve in it, but they're around it. And according to them, they take into account the history of Israel, the oral Torah, the things, but they say that times, in certain instances, times are so far different than when these decisions were made that they have to be rethought. For example, electricity, and but also a lot of things in the medical situation. I mean, I know you can look for sources about whether you can implant, embryos
Embryos.
and things like that. But
It's generally accepted to me.
yeah, but these things, I mean, I'm not critical of the concept of orthodoxy. I think there's a big difference that if you feel that you're obligated to do something, or if it's your choice to do something. But which I think might be the big difference between orthodoxy. But there's a big difference between conservatism and reform.
Yes.
Also.
First of all, I agree with the last sentence. There's a big difference between conservative and reform and what justifies making a change. And there's a discussion, is it justified? Can it be justified? And so on. And a lot more things are taken into consideration. If I try to word what you're, in a different way, what you're saying about this, the third slippery slope, is that because we are not willing to consider certain things, then we end up being reformed in the opposite direction. We end up making wrong halachic decisions because we're not willing to consider and discuss and weigh the different options. And because we have to keep things in a certain way, sometimes we have to keep things in a certain way that started 100 years ago, or not 3,000 years ago, or all kinds of different decisions where we're making the wrong halachic decisions, we're maybe even reforming halakha. It's one thing to say it's important for our community that we don't change. It's another thing to say it's not permissible to make a certain change. So in some ways that can also be a form of reform. And I'm not discussing any one of the details that you mentioned. Each one of them can be discussed, and there are many other examples. But I agree with the concept. And at the same time, I also agree that the world around us and certain things, at certain times, there are things that change, and therefore the halachic decision in a certain area should be different than it was in the past. Not because we're changing the halakha, because the criteria are different than they were in the past. I'll give one example of that, and that is brainstem, mavet shel geza hamoach, the brain, not cell, brain death. Okay, which allows today organ donation, because the halachic criteria for a person who's dead is if he's not breathing. Therefore, when the issue came up that if the brain stem is dead and a person is on machines that are making his body continue breathing, which keeps on pushing oxygen into the body, which keeps the organs alive, his brain is dead, but his organs are still alive. was a discussion, was an argument, is still an argument in certain circles, because it doesn't fit with the halachic criteria that was for thousands of years. That is the person, you're not allowed to kill a person to save another person, okay? You can't kill a person and take his organs to save someone else's life. It doesn't make sense, obviously. But if a person is, so in the past, there was nothing, you couldn't donate organs because the person had to stop breathing. Then he's dead. Then we can use his organs. They're no good anymore. They're not good.
Mhm.
With the new criteria, the new facts, the new things to take into consideration, that we have a person who's breathing through technology, not because he's breathing independently. His brain is dead, but his organs, his lungs are continuing to breathe, and therefore the organs are getting oxygen and they can be donated. And there are those, to this day, there are those who won't accept that because the halachic criteria is he's breathing, and if he's breathing, you're not allowed to kill him. But most of the authorities today, and it's evolved a little bit over the last decade or two, certainly in the Tzioni Dati, in the religious Zionist world, but also in much of the Haredi world, is accepted today. The idea that the brain is dead and you can donate, that's considered death, and you can donate the organs. But I'm using that as an example. It's not that we changed the halakha. The things to be taken into consideration in making the decision have changed. That's one kind of thing to consider, and that's a great discussion. Those are very interesting halachic discussions to discuss. There are other discussions where you would say, because of social changes, is it time to change a halachic decision? I accept that it's a worthy discussion. It's an important discussion. But not always the answer is it should be changed. Sometimes the decision is that we can't. We don't have the authority. It's a clear Torah law. We can't change that. There are all kinds of considerations where conservative discussions will say, yes, it's important to make the change for Judaism. We can't force the community to keep this. So to keep the community together, which is a higher level of a value, it's a more primary value, keeping the community together. And because of historical issues that we take into, that not we, they, conservative rabbis take into consideration more than Orthodox rabbis, they will make the decision, yes, we should make the change. And Orthodox rabbis will say, we cannot. Maybe we would like to, but we can't. Maybe we don't agree with that, we would like to, but we can't. We don't have the authority, we don't have the ability, we don't have the tools, the criteria haven't reached the point where we can say this should be a change that should be made. So on the one hand, I'm agreeing with you that there are some instances where that is the case, like you're saying. It's a slippery slope to take into consideration. Sometimes by sticking with halakha, we are not keeping the real halakha. Understand that. Sticking with the framework of what seems to be a halakha, of what was done in the past, sometimes is not really performing halakha. On the other hand, there's a lot of discussion that has to take place openly, with an open mind, and the conservative decisions are more easy to come to a new decision, and the Orthodox are more difficult to come to a new decision, not impossible. And again, you are with the question of are they going too fast or is someone else going too slow? But something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Maybe this question relates to the issue of speed of change, but you said at this meeting where you stood up as a young radical 10 or 15 years ago and said, look, things have to change. Now we're a little bit older and young people tend to be a little bit more radical. So I would ask you the following. You have a conference like this again now. Do the younger people, in their 40s and 50s, do they have similarly shall we say, novel or progressive is a loaded word, I suppose, these days, or innovative ideas that might be discussed? Or, on the other hand, another social tendency that happens is that you have a pendulum. Sometimes the pendulum swings one way and then it swings back. What's happening? Are the younger people, continuing along this path of innovation, or is a pendulum swinging backward?
Okay, the pendulum is a reason to keep things at a wise pace, because if we run too far, too fast, then I believe there will be a reaction and the pendulum will swing too far in the opposite direction. It will cause friction and sometimes the progress that you want to make is going to backfire. It's going to create, how do you say going backwards rather than progress?
Regress.
Regression, yes. In the same way that I believe that even things that are very positive, if you do them too powerfully and too fast, they're going to create a reaction in the opposite direction. If you push people religiously very fast in things that are all positive, but sometimes it's too much for them, sometimes it's too much for their surroundings, it's going to cause a very powerful opposition, all kinds of things that are not halachic issues, but are things to be taken into consideration if you want to be pragmatic. I don't see that pendulum swinging in the opposite direction. I do see it always been that there are people who stand firm at move farther in the opposite direction because they think that they need to be very firm because they need to stop us and to create that kind of balance. I don't think it's swinging in that way. I think there have always been people over there. Are there younger rabbis and rabbaniyot who are pushing for other things? There are such cases. Tell you one short story. There is a group every year that is put together by a certain movement of young potential religious leaders, men and women, not inevitably rabbis, can be all kinds of public leadership positions in education and not directly in politics, but in all kinds of positions. And they go through a year of meetings with all kinds of different streams of Orthodox Judaism in Israel and non-Orthodox, and they go to the United States for a week or two and meet with different denominations and with the far out, those that are farthest away, like things that Michael and Etta you described before. They even meet with them and to know what's going on in the world and come back and continue your leadership role, being more acquainted with all kinds of things that are going on in the Jewish world. And a couple of times they've brought them to meet with Osher and myself to tell them about Kinor David as in call it innovative Orthodox community where we do certain things and we're trying to address the reality of the world that we're in today. And in the past, they would hear our story and what we do and be very positive about it. And the last time we had this should be happening after Pesach again, I assume, unless it was canceled this year because of the war. The last time we had this almost a year ago after Pesach, about this time of year, a year ago, one of the young participants, we described, David, and his reaction was, that's it? Nothing new about you guys. And I said to him, like I sound like I'm 119 years old. Young man, where were you? You weren't born 30 years ago when we were starting this. I didn't put him in those words, but I basically said to him, okay, I hear what you're saying. Go ahead, let's see you. This was a process that we had to go through with opposition, with all kinds of things. You think this is way back. It's as they say in Hebrew and Israeli, they say, it's the korkach shnota, it's the 2010s, you're so way back. Okay, maybe it's the 20th century, not the 21st. We'll see where you're going to take it. But yes, there are, it's absolutely accepted, keeping within Orthodox restrictions that women are participant and equal and, rabbinic roles and positions. That's totally, and any argument about that is way, way back. And there's no discussion about it. Where are we going to take it? That's a discussion. And as I said, there are communities today where there's a certain range of what they do, where women have aliyot, where women lead parts of the tefillah, not other parts, where they're Orthodox, egalitarian, and that work together. I don't know. I haven't gone there. I haven't participated. It's going to be challenging for
Works.
rabbis, as you said, not those who are 40 or 50. I don't know. We're going to see where it's going to take the Jewish Orthodox world. And I will say honestly, some of them will end up somewhere in between, in a very interesting place, somewhere in between what we would call conservative or Orthodox, and I'm not sure what to call them. And as we see in everything in today's world, people object very often to being called X, not only on gender
Labels.
issues, labels, exactly. Are you Orthodox? Are you conservative? I am myself. I don't have to step into a certain box. Don't put me in a box. I'm not in a box. And it has its advantages and disadvantages, obviously. And I think that's very much where a lot of things are at today. People are less into boxes, more into a community. It is what it is. You can join. You can say, I can't join. I don't accept it. But it's very flexible, fluctuating. And maybe I'm too old to participate, be an active participant, that kind of thing.
But do recall what you were like when you were younger.
That's why I'm saying I can't. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave the world to them. Vakasha, Raquel, you want to say something, Raquel?
No, I was hearing. Thank you. It's very interesting, everything.
Okay.
Thank you.
בסדר.
תודה רבה.
Pretty much
Thank you.
everyone to be continued. We're making slow progress. I do think we're making serious progress, slowly, but in a very serious way. And I am seriously considering having a meeting with Rabbi David Golinkin and hearing from him his perspective on the processes that went through in his lifetime within the conservative movement.
Okay, I just looked it
Joining
up.
to understand it.
One quick-
He was born in 1955. I just looked it up.
Oh, he's old.
He's young.
69.
Better perspective.
No, but I will
Yeah.
tell you this. I one time was at Yedidya in Jerusalem with friends, which is a modern Orthodox shul. And he was there. And I guess at the Kiddush, I don't remember when, but we started to chat. And he apologized. He said, I'm sorry. It's not like I come here all the time, but my wife is a member here.
That's the opposite of what you might expect, that he would be a member there and she would be a member in some conservative.
No, but it just came to me, that memory. Yeah. The
Okay.
fact is that there are a lot of shuls in Jerusalem that are modern Orthodox, that are, creating new boundaries.
There are specific areas in Israel. One of them is Drom Yerushalayim. That's known to have all kinds of different kinds of communities. It's fascinating that there are some in Lod, because there's a younger people have moved to Lod. There are things going on in Pardes Chana. One of our children is considering living in Pardes Chana. There's a lot of spiritual activity, religious spiritual activity in Pardes Chana, which is very varied. Within, totally Orthodox, totally non-Orthodox, but interested in Judaism and spirituality, and anywhere within the range in between at all kinds of points. And it's very interesting. It's fascinating to see where is it going to take us. I don't dare to even try and prophesize.
That's one of the amazing things about Judaism, is that there's this incredible continuum from one edge to another edge. But it's a continuum. It's not, this clumps, and there's no central authority, and yet it functions somehow.
Well, the issue of no central authority, some people are happy about, and some more religiously oriented people are upset about it.
Of course, but there's no
And sometimes that stops the change, because you will see from, again, it's not necessarily a negative sword. It's a two-edged, two-sided issue, because sometimes the lack of authority is what enables the change, because the authority would stand on their, strong on their feet and say, no, you can't do that. And sometimes the lack of authority for some people is what prevents the change, because if there was an authority that said, yes, we can make this change, I would accept it, because then it's a central authority and we're all doing it together within the halachic framework. but because there isn't a central authority that will do it. And you, Tzvi Kohen, you can't do that. Because the leading rabbis didn't say it's okay. If they don't say it's okay, I won't accept it. So it pulls
But
in both
somehow,
directions.
without the central authority, somehow it still maintains a cohesion, and it's still, you know, it's the oldest one of the monotheistic religions, after all, you know. Somehow it works without a pope. You know?
And I will say that one of my rabbis of Liechtenstein, who I've mentioned different times also in discussions with you, once said in a public discussion about what kind of Torah learning there should be in the Beit Midrash and the yeshivot. Should there be Tanakh and all kinds of, in the yeshivot generally in the last couple of hundreds of years, this is not necessarily, it's always been this way, but in the last couple of hundreds of years, the main study in the yeshivot is Gemara, is Talmud. And now in Israel, interestingly, not so much out of Israel, but in Israel, there's a lot of interest in Tanakh, in Jewish philosophy, in all kinds of different kinds of perspectives from which to study Torah. And there was a very interesting discussion between Rav Lichtenstein and another one of the people I studied with, Rav Shagal. Both of them, Zichronam Livracha, have passed away. And Rav Shagal was more enthusiastic about change and new ideas and things like that. Rav Lichtenstein was the more conservative of the two. And I asked him at that discussion, that's very interesting, because at your yeshiva at Gush, Har Etzion, in Alon Shvut, they study Tanakh, and Tanakh is very central. But I'll tell you that it's not in the Beit Midrash, it's in they have another kind of avenue of the yeshiva, which is more the teaching, what is it called? It's a formal institution. They give teaching degrees for teachers. It's called it's Michlelet Herzog. It's a Michlala. What would you call that?
Yeah.
Teacher seminary? And there
Yeah,
But it's just for men, right? It's just for men.
no, they're for women also. For women also.
Well,
Both my daughters studied in
Oh, okay.
they have it in separate campuses. It's separate, men and women, but they have for men and they have for women. But in any case, I asked him that question, and he said to me, I'm open to the possibility that there might be an evolution of changes in the Beit Midrash, but I don't want us to lose connection with the traditional yeshiva. So we will stay connected to the tradition of yeshivot, that Gemara is the main study, but we will create another avenue of our Beit Midrash where they will be studying Tanakh. It was very interesting for me to see this is his thinking. He's open to change. He's keeping us within a certain, he's keeping the connection with where we come from, accepting that we might grow to somewhere new. And also, I believe, accepting in my relationship with him that, that between myself and Osha and him, sometimes my strong feeling was, okay, you're the guys who are pushing forward. I'm going to be the one who's holding you back. And that's together is going to create a balance. Sometimes we disagreed because of that. But it wasn't a disrespectful disagreement, or it wasn't saying, you're get out of here, you're going way, way beyond anything that's reasonable. But it was saying between you and me, we have to keep this kind of balance. So that's what I was thinking of in relation to your what you were raising, and I also will say that it's part of our thinking about Kinol David, that we don't want to move too far from the general religious Orthodox community. Haredim, most of them are not going to accept us. Non-religious, some are interested, some not. But within the Zionist Orthodox communities in Israel, we want to be bringing upon a certain process, but if we are too far away from what's accepted in the community, we won't make any process. We'll just be insignificant. So that's a reason for us to be thinking constantly of where we are at, what our borders are, and where we're, what things we accept and what things we don't.
Rabbi, one quick comment.
Yes.
First of all, it was really fun to see how uncomfortable you are being considered as a mainstream rabbi now. So you'll have to find your comfort zone there. I thought of an analogy for Kinor David, which would probably applies at almost any synagogue. which is kind of like in chemistry, you can add various elements together with a base of water. And as long as you've got the proper amount of each element, everything will stay in solution. And if there's too much of one thing, then you may have something fall out of that solution, and then you've got a different problem. Quinoa de vide to me has been a blend of different aspects, and some stronger, some weaker, and things change. But I think one of the cautionary things for all of us there is going to be that it doesn't get so out of balance that it becomes a problem. Everybody has to find their comfort with where things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but for different people, those are different things.
I
It's a
know.
problem for
That's
whom?
what he's talking about, yeah.
For whom does it become a problem, Michael?
You're never going to make everybody happy.
That's right.
I like the chemistry analogy, but in my professional life, I moved a little bit from chemistry to physics. So let me try this analogy instead. A physics analogy, where you take a rubber band, right? And you stretch it, and you can stretch it, because rubber bands are flexible until a point where it
Until-
breaks. If it breaks, you can't go back. You have to avoid that point.
That's Fiddler on the Roof. Everybody knows that.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
Very
thank you,
interesting.
everyone.
Good night.
Again,
Bye.
we meet in 3 weeks
Bye,
because
Atul.
next
Bye.
week is Yom Ha'atzmaut. 2 weeks will be the Hebrew. The next English will be in 3 weeks.
Okay,
Thank you.
sounds good.
Thank
Thank you. Bye.
you.
Bye.